Okay, so this is going to be a doozy, and I'd put some extra work into this review, probably like an extra week, because I just, this one was bad. This one was stupid and bad. So, this is my review for the Law Enforcement Guide to Satanic Cults, which came out in 1994. The said film is a laughable piece of satanic panic media that came out, of course, in 94, though I'm unsure. Honestly, I'm unsure if it was actually used in any law enforcement settings. But if it was, I have my doubts that anyone took it seriously. One of its main failures is to actually connect the idea of witchcraft and Satanism that is enforceable by law, or to penalize by law. Obviously, the idea of the film was to spread fear of virtually any religion that was different from Christianity. Ironically, the creators to this film showed themselves to be incredibly bigoted in ways that they likely did not even understand or catch, obviously. So the film starts out with an admittedly like funky kind of good song. At least I thought it was good. I've seen other people's reviews where they think the segue music, to put it that way, the music is pretty bad. I liked it personally in that like 90s synthesizer keyboard kind of way. To me, it's a shame actually that the music was wasted on what is such a stupid film, because it would have honestly been the perfect type of background music for a computer sales pitch for like a bad 3D graphics cartoon thing, you know. If anyone watches this and they remember, or if they've seen the like not late 90s, really that mid 90s, distinctly that mid 90s early CGI kind of cartoon look. That is what this music I felt was perfect for. But it is wasted on this piece of crap film. So they open with art from different cultures, which is obviously to like scare the viewer, which is strange considering that it's supposed to be law enforcement watching this, not just the average person. They admit that unless they catch anyone committing a crime, there's nothing they can do. So the film tries to connect satanic cults / crimes to sex crimes, but this just seems like a reach, just to allow Christian propaganda to put itself into spaces that it doesn't belong in. Before we bring up any religion or any spiritual beliefs, I think that it is important to know that we know the facts to what actual crime was committed. The largest negative contention I have about this movie is how it bombards the viewer with things that are supposed to be evil, satanic, and witchcraft. Yet it barely connects these with a criminal offense, something actually enforceable by law. In the typical fashion of other satanic panic media, we see loads of information about rituals and the things that these alleged criminals use, but the actual facts, which would have been about criminology, forensic science, and victimology, are scant if they even appear at all, which is nearly never. Of course, we begin the film with the categorization of satanic worshippers, they don't say devil worshippers. They say satanic or Satan worshippers. So in this film, this one categorizes the worshippers in 3 groups, starting off, of course, with the dabblers, and then there is the spiritually involved, and third are the criminally involved. And the movie's like, what we focus on are the criminally involved, the third category. But this is just the same as the other propaganda films from the 80s. And they just stole information from the films that came out at that point nearly 10 years before. So, right after this scene, we are acquainted with the big bozo of the film, this guy named Eric Pryor, who was an alleged former high priest Satanist that turned Christian and spent his time now informing people on the dangers of Satanism. It might seem harsh of me to call him a bozo, but I will let you know later on this film, or sorry, later on in this video, that such a term is deserved. But on top of that, in the first scene with Pryor, he's walking into this park that just so happened to be the perfect place of satanic worship, with all of the signs coincidentally showing up right there at the time of filming. Who would have thought, right? So, Pryor stated that there were two communities that used the park they show in the film, which the park itself is never named, of course. And the two communities that use the park are listed as the pagan/occult community and the homosexuals. This is the only time, by the way, that homosexuals are brought up in this film. And so this makes this an even more crazy statement. Because what did the gay people have to do with this? And I didn't write this down, but I thought about it after I, initially made this review. Was this, honestly, let's think about this now. Was this like a bigoted way to blame homosexuals for the AIDS outbreak, the AIDS crisis, which was prevalent in the 80s. I don't know if there's any way I could really connect the two, especially offhand. This is just off the top of my head. But I've wondered in some ways if parts of the Satanic Panic, which was very, very big in the 80s, was also like a way to blame people for the AIDS crisis, because these things were happening at the same time, and satanic crimes and everything evil, everything satanic, blah, blah, blah. That's just a thought. Anyway, so for whatever reason, Eric Pryor stated that these communities, the occult, pagans, and the homosexuals, go hand in hand. And I wondered, why did he say that? Of course, this is just Christian homophobia, but if we were to take his words seriously, that he was actually an ex-Satanist, would it be wrong to assume that he might have been gay or bisexual? Honestly. That's an honest question, I think, to have. Is that why he became a Christian again? Actual question. Because there are people who are conflicted between their sexuality and their religious beliefs. While I believe that he just said this stuff in passing to prove his point about the park having ne'er-do-wells, obviously logic wasn't put into these statements and how this could actually be applied to him. And I mean, as later on, once again, I actually thought of the movie Satanic, where Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan admitted in 1969, mind you, that they accepted homosexuals for who they were. So if it's satanic to accept homosexuals, should I even finish this statement? Anyway, so this film came out in 1994, which is 25 years after Satanic. So I think that it's really funny that the Satanists proved themselves decades before to be more loving and tolerant of their fellow man, or sorry, not tolerant, more accepting of their fellow man than the Christians. So from here, Pryor walks into the park and just so happens to see a pentacle spray painted on a tree. He surprisingly calls it by the right name, the pentacle, and I found it interesting how it wasn't a pentagram. Surely the people that made this film spray painted the symbol, desecrating the poor tree. And honestly, it bothered me that an innocent tree would be violated for the sake of a propaganda film. Other trees are found in the movie with spray painted signs on them, somehow magically just so happening to be there at the time of filming. Wow. So next was an inverted cross, which is noted as fresh by Pryor himself, proving, hey, y'all just made this shit for the movie. So, for some reason, he calls the inverted cross a satanic symbol, which is a common misconception. In reality, the inverted cross is actually known as St. Peter's cross. The story, very quickly in a nutshell, is that St. Peter felt like he was unworthy to Jesus Christ. And so when he died, he wanted his cross to be upside down because, of course, Christ was on the regular cross, and so St. Peter was on the inverted one because he felt unworthy to Jesus himself. This is actually a part of Catholicism. And it's very interesting how a born again Christian, Eric Pryor, didn't seem to know this. This is the beginning of multiple instances where various parts of Christianity itself, is considered satanic by a Christian of all people. So, of course, I found this amusing and ironic. Pryor goes on to say that the colors red, white, and black are traditional satanic colors, though there is no proof of this or no source. He just says this in passing with nothing cited or put on the screen. I wonder if he claimed this because of how those colors are commonly seen in the movie Satanic, for example. So Pryor goes on to coincidentally find a voodoo Vivi spray painted on the pathway saying that a money ritual was done. Which is ironic because, I mean, wasn't this film made to make money? Who was doing the money ritual? Anyway, so the voodoo Vivi is spelled incorrectly in this movie, where instead of two E's, it has two I's. Once again, they're just showing a lack of knowledge on the subject that they're talking about. Pryor tries to connect the usage of voodoo with Satanism, which was a common talking point in the satanic panic propaganda films. I find the idea of voodoo being satanic, therefore evil, as racist, honestly. It shows a lack of understanding on what the actual belief system is about, and it comes off as a modern day colonizer trying to attack anything that isn't Christian. Pryor shows off more graffiti, where an eye is spray painted, which is claimed to be the eye of Anubis. And he pronounces Anubis wrong, on top of completely ignoring a swastika that was right next to the symbol. I believe, I'm trying to remember, instead of Anubis, he said like Anubis. It's like, Anubis? That's like on the same level of when I watched The Devil's Reign, and the one dude's wife says, reggae Satanist? Fucking reggae Satanist. You have Bob Marley. Reggae Satanist. Anyway. So, of course, the swastika wasn't even brought up. And then Pryor goes on to claim that the Eye of Anubis was to show that the people who did this, who spray painted, I guess, weren't witches, but Satanists. This is said with an inflection that we're supposed to think of Satanists as bad. Like, this wasn't done by witches. This was done by Satanists. I mean, he doesn't say it like that, but, it's supposed to be dramatic. And you're like, so who are we prosecuting? This is supposed to be about law? Right now, we have nobody that we can take to court. You're wasting fucking time and resources. So, anyway, I have to remind you, of course, that this is for the law enforcement, and the idea would be to get information. Law enforcement is to get information to eventually, have trials and help out the attorneys. And so far, all that is shown in this film is vandalism. Now, vandalism is, of course, a criminal offense, but without catching the culprits in the act, there's nothing that they can do. And this is something that the movie itself admitted to in the intro. So Pryor walks up to two storage containers, calling them dumpsters of all fucking things, dumpsters. And he points out just more graffiti on it. He shows a tag and a mushroom. He tries to say that the mushroom that was spray painted was a way for cultists to communicate with each other, that they had a psilocybin ritual. All just ridiculous claims. And for what? Nothing. So the next scene shows more graffiti, of course. A lot of this is just about fucking graffiti. You know, when you think about it, you're just talking to cops about graffiti, which is something that they knew about anyway. So the graffiti scene here is Hallie, not Shemham for Ash, but Shemhem for Ash on a wall. You know, it's supposed to be Shemham for Ash. Once again, the people who made this had no idea what they were doing, and obviously just spray painted it right before they cut on the camera. What bothers me is that we are seeing what is actual evidence of vandalism. Seriously. But it's excused for the sake of the film. Ironically, this could have been used as evidence against Pryor, technically, if anyone so decided to prosecute him for fucking graffiti. Is this video not proof of that? So, he claims that Hallie was part of the invocation, but there is no proof of that at all. I looked this up because I was like, what is Hallie Shemham for Ash? Like, what? And there was nothing about Hallie at all. He mentions the greater key is Solomon, but there's nothing to support his claim in the book about anybody named fucking Hallie. Pryor just so happens to find a noose in the park and somehow knows that it was used in a sacrifice for the ritual that allegedly went on at the park. He also goes on to magically find some lidocaine, or as it's said in the film, xylocaine, which is a form of lidocaine, blah, blah, blah. And he claims the lidocaine was used clearly by the cultists to numb their sacrifices, because they don't want their sacrifices to be in pain when they're killed. I mean, what? So this is ridiculous, because first of all, any fucking crackhead... Oh man, I'm swearing so much. But let's get real. Any crackhead can go to a park and leave their drugs behind. You know, I mean, there's just no proof whatsoever that evil satanic cultists came to the park the night before, performed a sacrifice, and yet no body is found. How does it make any sense that they found all this graffiti, the noose, the lidocaine, which is bloody, supposedly, and yet no body? Nothing. And on top of that, you would think that there would be proof of an actual sacrifice and, you know, remains, because you would see carry-on. If there was an actual body, and if somebody or something was actually killed the night before, wouldn't there already be vultures? That wasn't shown on film. Pryor claims that there's blood on the noose, but of course it doesn't show up on camera, you know, because obviously it wasn't ever there to begin with. He then goes on to show off another desecrated tree with the number 9 on it. He claims that it's in connection to the 9 satanic statements as created by Anton LaVey. What really annoyed me was that he couldn't even pronounce Xander right. If he was going to make LaVey look like the evil bad guy, don't you think it would make sense for him to figure out how to pronounce his freaking name? I mean, why not just say Anton LaVey instead? This detracts even further from Pryor's credibility, not that he really had any, but Pryor goes on to say that the graffiti showed that there were Satanists at the park and they were partying. You know, so scary and illegal. The only thing potentially criminal here would be trespassing after park hours, which not that was ever mentioned. They go on then in the film to show the 9 satanic statements, and I wonder if anyone actually watched this video, like law enforcement, if they saw this and they saw the statements, did anyone actually think that was bad? Did anyone... I mean, I have a hard time finding anything wrong with the 9 satanic statements because they don't condone animal abuse or wasting your time on people that don't deserve it. I mean, Anton LaVey would probably say I broke the satanic statements by watching this fucking movie. You know, did Eric Pryor deserve my time? Technically, no. Anyway, they make it clear, though, less than 20 minutes in, that this film should not be taken seriously. Later on, they show a symbol for lead, which is claimed as the insignia for the Church of Satan, which, of course, isn't true. Now, you do see various parts of Church of Satan ephemera that shows the lead alchemical lead symbol, but it's not unique to Anton LaVey or the Church of Satan or anything like that. The alchemical symbol for lead, which some people believe, oh, that's the symbol of Satan, technically it's not. That predates the Church of Satan. That predates anything that people have ever associated with devil worship. But anyway, in a way, not that off the top of my head did Zena LaVey mention the alchemy symbol, I don't think, but she talked about, the Baphomet symbol. And even in her fact sheet, she helped prove that these were not unique to the Church of Satan, after her father's death. So while in the park, the film constantly, for whatever reason, goes to this digital shot of the park. And it's just as if they couldn't figure out what else to put on the screen. Anton LaVey and the Satanic Bible are made out to be the boogeyman, and they claim that Satanists try to get the attention of an evil God instead of the good God. This is once again not true, as the Church of Satan considers themselves to be atheists. Of course, to Christians, though, there's a lot of Christians that will associate atheism as Satanism. And of course, others they just believe that atheism is just as bad as Satan itself. The belief of no God is just as bad as not worshiping God. You know what I mean? So it's okay, what is illegal here? So the film tries to connect actual crimes with Satanists and witchcraft, but there's no proof of this. They list all types of crimes, claiming that this is done in the name of Satan, which once again takes away the severity of the crimes itself. They list nearly all sorts of crime here, seriously, claiming that it has to do with Satanism or that these crimes are satanic. But at what point does a crime become satanic? When is a crime just a crime? This is never addressed. There is no real definition as to what makes a crime a satanic crime, and for a video that is supposed to be for law enforcement, you would think that there'd be a legal definition of this. Of course, there isn't and never was, because trying to persecute somebody, or prosecute technically is the right word, right? Trying to prosecute somebody in the United States of America based on religion alone is impossible and illegal. That is unconstitutional. The film goes on to try and scare the viewer by showing how different non-Christians set up their altars of worship. So we see voodoo, Satanism, and Wiccan. Well, technically Wicca, but they say witchcraft. Which, of course, in these type of films is always the trifecta of evil. And I found it bigoted and disgusting, actually. Once again, we see how a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant tries to paint the picture that anything unlike their religion is bad and therefore evil. It's disgusting to me how showing the differences in how people worship is supposedly bad. Why is it bad that people worship in different ways? What was really laughable was how Pryor tried to show that patron saint candles were used only in voodoo, Macumba, and Santeria as part of what is a scary ritual. These are religions that are from non-European origin. So, of course, this is made out to be bad. He then goes on to show an altar oil that would be used, and that is depicted like it's a bad thing. And that is frustrating to see, because anointing oils are something talked about and used in the Bible itself. Christianity has the same exact thing. And once again, he proves himself to not only be a fake ex-Satanist, but a fake Christian. My God, he doesn't even know his own book. And in fact, I need to go grab something. So what really bothers me is that the patron saint candles they're painted to be strange and weird. In different parts of Christianity, these candles are used. Where I live, a lot of Mexican Catholics use these candles for prayer. That's what it's for prayer. I even bought one myself for the sake of this video. I hope I can show it. Oops, let's see. Here we go. Look, this is the Miraculous Lady. It smells good. It smells like flowers. This one is scented. A lot of them are unscented, but this is what they look like. This is kind of similar to what is shown in this film, the law enforcement film. If you hear my dog, she's just barking for whatever reason. My bad. Anyway, so these candles are typically made, at least where I live, a lot of them come in. They're made in Mexico. They're shipped from Mexico to America. This one I bought just like this one. This one was also made in Mexico and, shipped here to America. This, once again, this is something that you see in different cultures. The Catholics where I live and the Pentecostal too, they pray using these types of candles. So once again, it's like, isn't that racist? Isn't that bigoted to say people who use these tools for their version of worship are satanic or evil? That or somebody that should be prosecuted. I mean, that's what you're saying here. This video is supposed to be for law enforcement. So if you're saying that people who use these should be locked up, what are we really saying here? He's such a joke. Like I said, usually these candles have a prayer on the back, just like this one. And they're usually in Spanish. Where I live, they're usually in Spanish. Sometimes they have Spanish and English on the back. I find that prior's condemnation of these candles, of course, to be bigoted, and another way to put down other races, even if they also worship Christianity. So it's clear to me that the audience for this film wasn't actually law enforcement. And it's clear to me that anyone who was supposed to watch this film likely wasn't anticipated to be anything other than white. And I know this is like really getting into some territory here, but I think it's very important to point out that not only are these claims in this movie, this film, unsubstantiated, it also brings up a lot of bigoted, prejudiced ideas too that were never touched on after, of course, the Satanic Panic finally fucking died down. So the description of the altars is also a waste of time because first of all, it's obviously just a way to pad out the video. But it's a waste of time because this has nothing in it that would be illegal. He's just saying, like, the alleged Satanists do this, and then the voodoo people do this, and the Wiccans do that. Okay? None of this is illegal. So the video then goes on to list satanic symbols, most of which were discussed with the graffiti. They also show the anarchy symbol, and they also show the swastika, which, even though the swastika was on that wall next to the Eye of Anubis, they don't actually mention the swastika until this small section here. And of course, to me, these symbols were out of place, the anarchy symbol and swastika, because to me, those are political symbols. Now, I know, of course, the swastika is different in Eastern religion. It has a much different look and meaning in Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, and so forth. I know it is totally different there. But in the Western world here, that is a very politically charged symbol for obvious reasons. So I do wonder if they were just lumping the anarchy and swastika symbols in there, which of course this is also something seen in older 80s Satanic Panic films too, the anarchy symbol. But it wouldn't surprise me that considering how bigoted they are, I just wonder if, they were lumping it all in there as a whole. It's all bad, so it's satanic, They also claim, this is something I never heard before, which makes this even crazier, that they put the swastika in there as satanic, because they say that the swastika was used by witches and warlocks for magic, which isn't substantiated, of course. They provide no source for this. They just say it. This isn't even cited like in any book or anything. They just say it. They bring up a glossary of satanic terms, which consists of blood, cult, coven, and grottos, which a lot of this is obviously inspired by Anton LaVey. But then there's also a bunch of other stupid words in there too. And it's all just Christian fear-mongering. And it talks about nothing illegal. And then they make claims that are not substantiated either. For example, they also claimed that Satanists eat the brains of their sacrifices to gain their powers. This isn't substantiated, and I don't even know where they got that from, other than probably just their fucking asshole. The film, of course, goes on to talk about children and ritual abuse, which, of course, are just Christian torture stories. An unnamed face of a blacked-out woman describes a story of what happened to her as a child in a satanic cult. And then they show pictures of art that we are supposed to assume was created by children that are supposed to convince the viewer that these stories are real. The woman admits that she participated in the murder of babies. So this is yet another Christian film that doesn't seem to understand that such claims should be pursued by law enforcement if true. This is a bold thing to claim that this woman participated in murders in a film that is supposed to be for law enforcement. Obviously, at this point, what is talked about in the film is fake, because otherwise the authorities would have had to investigate these claims. It is illegal not to do so. Of course, this is likely why the woman in the scene had her face blacked out, so that no one could potentially identify her and call her out on the streets as a liar. She then goes on to recite a poem she allegedly wrote about the torture, and near the end she says, "I do not see, nothing happened, don't remember, helter-skelter, now dismember, witches chant and babies burn, mustn't talk." And it goes on a little bit more, and it's just bullcrap. But, of course, this, to me, was surely a nod towards the fear that was put into the masses after the Tate LaBianca murders, where it was claimed that the victims were murdered in accordance to the helter-skelter race war theory. Helter-skelter was such a scary term, come 1970. This was, of course, a low blow because those deaths had nothing to do with Satanism and whatever crap that this movie was talking about. The film goes on to identify symptoms of sexual abuse in a child, which these are true, but they associate all of these with Satanism. This is, of course, disgusting to me because it minimizes the abuse in order to focus on religion. There's so much emphasis put on the Satanism thing that the actual victims are tossed to the side. The film goes on to say that there are teens who dabble in Satanism, but this isn't substantiated, and we have to take some random people by their word. Then a calendar of so-called satanic holidays is listed, and they go through the entire year, and I guess they just decided to make up some, There's no source from where any of these holidays came from, and it's all just made up. It's fake. They later describe various criminals that have committed alleged satanic crimes, but they don't delve further into any of them. People like Richard Ramirez are mentioned, but only by a couple of sentences. And of course, they don't mention how Richard Ramirez apparently told his victims to swear on Satan. Once again, this detail isn't brought up. So, for a video that is supposed to be about law or to be for law enforcement, they don't even focus on the legal side of things at all. The one crime that I suppose we can give them, I'll give them enough leeway, is that of Clifford St. Joseph, who really did seem to think that his crimes were part of a satanic initiation. I found it interesting that this was the only film that I've seen so far that seemed to have any pictures of Saint Joseph. But, of course, I still don't condone associating his crime as satanic, because in the way that they're talking about it in this film, they're saying that he committed the crimes because of Satanism or because of like a possession of the by the devil. And that's not true either, you know. It's clear that there were severe mental problems with this man. There was never anything mentioned in this film at all about in this case about forensic psychology. Nothing is ever mentioned about the psychological issues that could have allowed Saint Joseph to believe he was having some sort of satanic initiation by committing the crimes he did. Of course, if there had, it would likely have detracted from the Christian argument that it was a true satanic crime. Even still, St. Joseph committed his crimes about half a decade before this film was created. So despite all of the satanic panic, it seems that Christians could only ever come up with one good, or at least decent, example. The end of the film shows how a victim would be cut when sacrificed. There isn't any source to prove this, but it looks like it's something that they just made up, because it is. What was really interesting to me is that they claim the victims would be cut on the feet. I honestly wondered if this was inspired by the film Mardi Gras Massacre. And I know it just sounds like, how could they have seen this? How would they know? Well, in that movie, people were cut on the feet before being sacrificed. To me, there's no other place that the idea could have come from than a movie like that, if not that one in particular. To me, the people who created these Christian propaganda movies, they watched too much other or crap, you know? The people who created the satanic panic media must have been watching like horror movies themselves and just wanted to create a cash grab off of these things. This seems to be proven in a way, considering how Eric Pryor turned out to be a phony, in the very least. So that's pretty much the end of the review itself. And I guess I will just give the grade right here that this was a terrible film. And I would give it an F. Obviously, you know, it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of claims in here that are unsubstantiated. And when you think about how this was supposed to be for law enforcement and trying to prevent crimes, this film falls short. There's no statistical data, nothing from the Department of Justice, nothing that was ever even talked about. In fact, now that I think about it, they did not dare bring up the McMartin preschool case, because by 1994, that was pretty much a disproven thing, really. You know, they failed in court, so they didn't bring that up. What's interesting is that when I looked up on my own time any articles or information I could find about Eric Pryor, there were a few articles that talked about him, you know, in the 90s. And one article I found had talked about how he was an insufferable and weird person, honestly. Apparently, Eric Pryor had a bench warrant issued for his arrest in 1993 after beating his ex-wife. He claimed that the organization NOW, which is also known as the National Organization for Women, was a satanic-inspired organization. One article I found claimed or talked about how he had a female assistant that would drive him to his sermons, whatever you would call it, and he would bark orders at her. Pryor never did any of the driving. His assistant did. He didn't drive because he had anxiety. One source states that Pryor maintains that domestic violence laws are slanted against men. So the article talked about how Pryor was like men get arrested, taken to jail, even when they're the victims. And when men are the instigators, authorities neglect to look at what motivated the attack. Like as if beating somebody is ever justified. How Christian is that? And that's ironic, right? That's so ironic. He made a film that was supposed to warn law enforcement about satanic ritual abuse. And yet, ironically, this man was committing Christian domestic abuse. How ironic is that? Satanic ritual abuse? What about Christian domestic abuse? So, this dude was not a good person, to put it lightly. He's quoted as having stated, "Statistics show women are more inclined to start the physical violence." No proof for that, by the way. He claimed that his ex-wife attacked him with a knife the year before, so about 93, I believe. Somewhere around 92 or 93. So when the cops showed up, he says that they refused to listen to his side of the story. He was handcuffed, taken to the county jail, and he spent 5 months before copping a no contest plea to 2 felony charges. Somehow he got out with no contest, which in a legal sense is not exactly the best either. But so the incident of, or I guess another incident, this one article wasn't completely clear, but there was an incident with him on the morning of August 20th, 1994. And according to court documents, police were dispatched to the apartment he shared with his then wife, who was named Shelley, to investigate, of course, a report of domestic violence. And Pryor maintained that he was the one who called 911. Like as if that makes it any better. As if that means he didn't hurt her, So when they arrived, the cops said that Pryor appeared drunk and was holding a miniature bottle of vodka in one hand. The police had already responded to an earlier disturbance call, which was about 4 a.m., and a call that Pryor had also made. But, of course, at that point, no arrests were made. So when the cops arrived the second time, about several hours later, they quickly focused on an 8-inch knife that was lying on the floor, and Pryor said that she chased him around with it. Pryor claimed that he was the victim and not his wife. His wife disagreed, telling the cops that Pryor had held the knife to her throat and said, "I'm going to kill you." Then, she said, he knocked her to the ground and proceeded to hit and kick her some 20 or 30 times. His wife then told the cops that he said, "I'm going to mess up your face so no one else will want you." The officers believed Shelley's version of the events and arrested him on 2 felony accounts, assault with a deadly weapon and spousal abuse. Despite a large bump above her left eye and assorted scrapes and bruises, she declined medical attention. Pryor's cowboy boots were booked into evidence. The cops say he became combative during the booking process, requiring the use of restraints and shackles. So in November of, I believe, 1995, Pryor was sentenced to 8 months in county jail and 3 years of formal probation. He was credited with 152 days of jail time already served and ordered not to have any contact with the victim, his then wife. And he keeps going. Court records show that Pryor moved to have the marriage annulled, I guess the June before this article, citing as the couple's separation date August 20th, 1994, the day of the incident. They were married, according to the records, just 1 month before. They were barely married for a month on July 16th, 1994. The marriage lasted a total of 34 days. So I guess likely after, or maybe before, I don't know exactly. Right before or right after this film, Law Enforcement for Satanic Bullshit, right before or after this was recorded, he got into trouble for beating his wife. How ironic. That is so ironic, is it not? He created a film for law enforcement, yet was booked by the law himself. That is ironic, is it not? You'd think that he would have at least obeyed by the 9 satanic statements, right? If he did, he would have avoided any trouble with the police. So I don't want to turn this into a biography about Eric Pryor, but, I don't want to make a separate video on him either. So in an article from Metroactive, it stated that he got into paganism when growing up. And reading more about how he apparently grew up, his life story, it's clear that having watched this film, he just brought up these random satanic symbols and stuff and things more as a way to just prove his knowledge about what he used to, I guess, read about with paganism. It was more of him being like, see, I know this, I know about it. And that's because he dabbled with it when he was younger. I'll be honest, I don't believe very much of what this man said to be true, but apparently he had in the 90s, a 7-page autobiography, which is what this article from Metroactive was citing. So apparently Eric Pryor was born on July 16th, 1959, amidst the feuding of his parents. And seeking relief from an abusive upbringing, he would often escape to the library, where he discovered the occult section. This led him to the Earth Star Temple in Manhattan, where he spent a short period of time exchanging sex for training in occult sciences. Kind of remember what I said earlier about the park and the two groups? Anyway, at the age of 14, according to his uncle, Paul Roves, his uncle pleaded with law enforcement officials to keep Pryor in jail after the 1994 double felony arrest. So the uncle said that Eric left home to live a life of debauchery, prostitution, drugs, alcohol, violence, vandalism, and Satan worship. At 17, he joined the Army, only to be later termed unfit for duty because of chronic LSD use. How interesting. Remember the psilocybin graffiti on the quote-unquote dumpster? So Eric Pryor claims to have taken in the neighborhood somewhere around 5,000 trips, using for his launching pad either acid or psilocybin mushrooms. After bouncing around places like Nicaragua and Arizona, he wound up in San Francisco, where he founded the Satan-worshipping New Earth Temple. I'd never heard of this Earth Star Temple, New Earth Temple. Never heard of this before and after this film. And I really didn't feel like looking it up either. The New Earth Temple, however, came to a fiery end in the parking lot of Jubilee Christian Center when he held a bonfire and burned its contents after his 1990 conversion. And 1990, I guess, was when he converted, quote unquote, to Christianity. But this also seems to have been just a way for him to get attention, because he got into the press just a little bit. He was able to get into the news cycle back through the mid-90s by claiming he was the witch who converted, the witch who quit, crap like that. It was all obviously a publicity stunt, basically. So anyway, it was around that time period of 1990, according to his uncle, that he stopped seeing psychiatrists, discontinued his medications, and returned to alcoholism and destructive behavior. So Eric Pryor denied his uncle's accounts, saying that his relative was just trying to build an insanity case to help the nephew avoid a jail sentence, which doesn't make sense, because the insanity plea almost never works. And if Eric Pryor was continuously getting into legal trouble for burning shit down, like arson or, domestic violence, you can't plead insanity to that. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you could, but you would still end up being convicted. Anyway, so around this time period or the jail sentence, this article isn't completely clear, but somewhere around this time period is when he began to embrace Christianity with what he boasts was or what he had boasted as the most highly publicized conversion in 100 years. So he publicly defected from like paganism, and he got a lot of course attention from the media. And at the time of this article that I'm reading from, which was about 1995 or 96, Eric Pryor kept a portfolio of the press clippings, all of everything that we talked about him in the news. He kept a fucking folder of the shit. And he seemed to seek out press coverage the way a moth is drawn to a flame. Power, he admits, was always his thing. Which is very interesting because in this film, they say that Satanists are drawn to power and that's why they like being part of the cult. It's all very, it's a self-report, basically. Law Enforcement Guide to Satanic Cults is really just a self-report on how terrible of a person Eric Pryor really was. And one quote, before I continue to another article, he stated, "Christians are the most powerful people on the face of the earth." Preaching to the choir, basically. And there's more to that article, but I just wanted to end it at that portion because it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's clear he was a fake. It seems clear to me, though, that people like Pryor were the type to get into trouble when they were younger because they're like a misguided soul for whatever reason. And then they decide they become Christians and they start to proselytize. People like Pryor, they see Christianity as a way to easily be believed because a lot of people, there's almost this like gullible naivete to actually devout Christians where they automatically believe that somebody is a Christian because they say so. Because typically you wouldn't believe, right? Who would lie about that? Who would lie about being a Christian just to make money? But that's what somebody like Eric Pryor did. It was clear it was just a way for him to get fame, hopefully make fortune, and get attention more than anything, just to have his face in people's minds. Thankfully, this didn't work, though. So since 1994, Pryor has since passed away. He actually died on June 7th, 2009. He apparently ran in front of a truck, and what one article said he was just trying to beat traffic. But I don't know. It stated that Eric Pryor was trying to make his way home to the Kuntz Lane Mobile Home Park. Another article stated that he had lived in the trailer park for about 4 years before his death. And so for whatever reason, one way or another, he decided that he could run in traffic and safely make it home. So there is a Find a Grave page for him, and it states that he was buried at the Artist Cemetery in Woodstock, New York, and he passed away at the age of 49. Once again, this was an insane ride, was it not? Recording this, this is almost an hour long, so of course editing it's going to be shorter, but I thought this was going to be like a quick, dumb film, and I could move on. But the more I started looking into this stuff with the Eric Pryor guy, it just got crazier and the worse it got. Once again, I give this film an F. It was terrible. And I give Eric Pryor an F as a Christian. He was an F-tier Christian. He didn't even know his own material. So I don't recommend Eric Pryor, and I don't recommend his film either. Law Enforcement Guide to Satanic Cults. There's nothing even enforceable in here. It's bad. It's dumb. Okay, well that's it. That's the review.